A black woman gave birth to a white child and was abandoned by her husband. Years later, in a hospital, Sophie woke up early that morning, excitement and nerves fluttering in her stomach like butterflies. She carefully got out of bed, trying not to disturb Sam, who was still sleeping soundly beside her. Sophie headed to the room that would soon become her son William's nursery. As she looked at the empty space, Sophie couldn't help but smile, the bare white walls seeming like a blank canvas ready to be filled with love and color. She began to imagine how the room would look once it was finished, with a cozy crib, a rocking chair, and shelves full of books and toys. A few minutes later, Sam entered the room, yawning and stretching. "Good morning, love," he said, wrapping his arms around Sophie and gently kissing her cheek. "Are you already thinking about the decor?" Sophie nodded, leaning into him. "Yes, I want it to be perfect for our little one. I was thinking of painting the walls yellow so the room feels cheerful and welcoming." Sam frowned slightly. "Yellow? Don't you think blue would be better? It's a relaxing color, and they say it helps babies sleep better." Sophie stepped back, crossing her arms over her chest, "But yellow is neutral and cheerful. Besides, I don't want to pigeonhole our child into gender stereotypes from the start." "It's not about stereotypes," Sam argued, his voice rising slightly. "It's about creating the best environment for our baby." The tension between them began to grow, their opinions differing over something seemingly simple. However, as they looked at each other, their expressions softened, both knowing that deep down they wanted the same thing, the best for their child. Sophie sighed, taking Sam's hand. "Look, I know we both have strong opinions about this, but how about we find a middle ground? We could paint the walls a soft yellow and add blue accents, like curtains or a rug." Sam considered this for a moment before nodding. "That sounds good. I'm sorry for getting worked up. I just want everything to be perfect for William." "Me too," said Sophie, squeezing his hand, "and it will be." They hugged in the middle of the empty room, allowing their love and excitement for their son's arrival to fill the space. Look, could a simple disagreement hide a deeper truth waiting to surface? Over the next few weeks, Sophie and Sam worked tirelessly on the baby's room. They painted the walls a soft yellow and added blue curtains and a rug. They filled the room with furniture and accessories they had chosen together, each reflecting their love and dedication for their son. As the due date approached, the room transformed into a cozy haven ready to welcome their new family member. Sophie and Sam often found themselves sitting in the rocking chair, imagining what their life would be like once William arrived. Sophie and Sam met at university on a rainy autumn day. Sophie was running across the campus, trying to get to her class on time, when she suddenly slipped in a puddle and fell to the ground, her books and papers scattering everywhere. As she struggled to get up, a hand appeared in front of her. She looked up and saw a tall, handsome young man with a kind smile on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, helping her to her feet. Sophie nodded, embarrassed. "Yes, thank you. I'm just a bit wet and dirty." The young man laughed, a warm and comforting sound. "Don't worry about that. Let me help you with your things." As they gathered her belongings, Sophie couldn't help but feel attracted to the young man's kindness and charm. He introduced himself as Sam, and despite Sophie's initial reservations, he insisted on walking her to her class. From that moment on, Sam began seeking out Sophie on campus, bringing her coffee on cold mornings and offering to study with her in the library. At first, Sophie was hesitant, aware of their different backgrounds. She came from a humble family struggling to make ends meet, while Sam came from a well-off background. However, Sam's persistence and genuine kindness eventually won her over. Sophie began to open up to him, sharing her dreams and fears. They discovered that despite their different backgrounds, they had a lot in common: a love for learning, a passion for helping others, and a desire to create a better future. Over time, their friendship blossomed into something deeper. They found themselves stealing moments together between classes, walking hand in hand across the campus, and sharing kisses in the library. Their love was like a beacon of light amid the pressures and difficulties of university life. One autumn day, 2 years after their first meeting, Sam took Sophie to a nearby park. The leaves crunched under their feet as they walked, the air crisp and invigorating. Suddenly, Sam stopped and turned to Sophie, taking her hands in his. "Sophie," he began, his voice trembling with emotion, "these past 2 years with you have been the best of my life. You have taught me what it means to love and be truly loved. I can't imagine my life without you." With tears in his eyes, Sam got down on one knee and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Sophie, my love, will you do me the honor of marrying me? I want to spend the rest of my life with you, through good times and bad." Sophie gasped, tears of happiness rolling down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion, "yes, I will marry you." Sam slipped the ring onto her finger and stood up, wrapping Sophie in a tight embrace. They kissed under the falling leaves, their love stronger than ever. They got married in a small ceremony surrounded by their closest friends and family. As they exchanged their vows, they promised to love and support each other through all the challenges that life might bring. The day of the delivery arrived with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Sophie and Sam arrived at the hospital early in the morning, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They were quickly taken to the delivery room, where Sophie's contractions intensified. Sam stayed by Sophie's side throughout the process, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement. "Come on, my love, you can do it," he whispered, kissing her sweaty forehead. "Soon, we'll have our baby in our arms." Sophie gritted her teeth through another contraction, her body tense with effort. "It hurts so much," she groaned, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." "You are the strongest woman I know," said Sam, looking into her eyes. "I'm here with you." With renewed determination, Sophie focused on her task, breathing deeply and pushing when the contractions peaked. After hours of labor, the climactic moment finally arrived. With one last push and a cry of effort, Sophie gave birth to her son. The baby's cries filled the room, and the nurse lifted him up, smiling, "Congratulations, you have a beautiful, healthy boy." However, as the nurse cleaned the baby, it became evident that something was not quite right. The baby's skin, instead of the rich brown tone they expected, was surprisingly white. Exhausted from the delivery, Sophie didn't immediately notice the anomaly. She reached out, eager to hold her son. "Let me see him," she whispered, a tired but happy smile on her face. But Sam, standing beside the bed, was stunned at the sight of the baby, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. How is this possible?" he stammered, his voice tense with confusion and growing anger. Sensing the tension, the nurse quickly placed the baby in Sophie's arms. Sophie looked at her son, her initial happiness turning into confusion as she noticed the unusual skin tone. "Sam," she said, looking up at her husband, "what's happening? Why does our baby look like this?" Sam's expression hardened, his eyes filled with accusation. "I don't know, Sophie. You tell me. How is it possible that our son is white?" Sophie was left speechless, shocked by the insinuation. "What are you suggesting? You know I've always been faithful to you. Have you?" Sam asked, his voice rising with barely contained anger, "Because I can't see any other explanation for this." The nurse, feeling uncomfortable with the unfolding scene, quickly excused herself from the room. Sophie hugged the baby to her chest, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sam, please," she begged, "there has to be an explanation. Maybe it's a recessive gene or something, but I've never, ever cheated on you." Sam ran his hands through his hair, his body trembling with emotion. "I don't know what to think, Sophie. This doesn't make sense." The atmosphere in the delivery room, which had previously radiated joy and excitement, turned tense and somber. Distrust and accusation hung heavily in the air, overshadowing the miraculous event that had just taken place. Sophie looked at her son, her heart filled with love and fear at the same time. She knew he was innocent in all of this, but she couldn't help but feel that his birth had triggered something that would change their lives forever. "Sam," she said quietly, "please, let's not make any hasty assumptions. Let's talk to the doctors, see if they can give us some answers." But Sam seemed lost in his own thoughts, his gaze distant and cold. "I need some air," he murmured, stepping away from the bed. I can't deal with this right now." With that, he left the room, leaving Sophie alone with her newborn son and a growing sense of fear. She looked at little William, cradling him close as she cried silently. "Everything will be okay, my love," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed her own words. "No matter what, I will always love and protect you." But even as she spoke those words, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that her world, once so full of promise and hope, was beginning to crumble around her. William's birth, which should have been the happiest moment of her life, was now tainted with doubt, accusations, and an uncertain future. She could only pray that they would find a way to overcome this. In the days following William's birth, the tension between Sophie and Sam only increased. What should have been a time of joy and unity was marred by distrust and accusations. Sam, unable to comprehend how their son could look so different from them, was consumed by anger and doubt. He spent hours away from home, avoiding Sophie and the baby, his mind swirling with dark thoughts. Meanwhile, Sophie struggled with recovering from childbirth and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a newborn alone. She tried to reason with Sam, begging him to listen. "Sam, please," she pleaded, rocking William in her arms, "you have to believe me. I have never been unfaithful to you. There has to be an explanation for this, maybe something in our genes that we don't know about." But Sam didn't want to listen. "A genetic explanation," he scoffed, his eyes cold and hard. "Do you really expect me to believe that somehow two black people can have a white baby? I'm not stupid, Sophie." "I don't understand it either," Sophie cried, tears of frustration rolling down her cheeks, "but I know deep in my heart that this baby is yours, ours, a product of our love." Sam shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Love? How can I believe in love when you've betrayed me in the most fundamental way?" "I haven't betrayed you," Sophie insisted, her voice breaking. "Sam, we've been through so much together. Do you really think I would do something like that, that I would ruin everything we've built?" For a moment, it seemed like Sam wavered, doubt and pain warring on his face, but then his expression hardened once more. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said quietly, looking away. Days turned into weeks, and the situation only worsened. Sam refused to hold or interact with William, treating the baby like a stranger in his own home. Sophie felt helpless, torn between her love for her husband and her need to protect her son. Finally, one day, things reached a breaking point during a heated argument. Sam finally voiced the dark thoughts that had been consuming him. "I can't do this, Sophie," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I can't live every day looking at that child and wondering who he really belongs to. I can't bear the thought that you've cheated on me." Sophie looked at him in horror, clutching William closer. "Sam, please, don't do this. We are a family." But Sam had already made his decision. "We are no longer a family," he said, his tone cold and final. "I can't trust you, Sophie, and I can't love a child that isn't mine." With that, he turned to leave, ignoring Sophie's pleas and sobs. In his confusion and anger, he had decided that he couldn't stay, couldn't face the reality of their situation. "Sam, where are you going?" Sophie shouted, panic rising in her voice. "You can't just leave us." But Sam didn't respond, moving like a man in a trance as he packed some of his belongings. Sophie watched him helplessly, her heart breaking with each passing moment. Finally, Sam stopped, looking at Sophie with an unreadable expression. "Come with me," he said, his tone almost robotic. "You and the baby. I'll take you to a place where you can stay for a while, until I can figure this out." Desperate and scared, Sophie saw no other option. She hastily packed a few things for herself and for William and followed Sam to the car, not knowing that this decision would change the course of their lives forever. The drive through the forest was tense and silent, the only sounds being the soft purr of the engine and William's occasional whimpers. Sophie clung to her son, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future held. Sam drove like a man possessed, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Finally, he stopped in an isolated clearing, the dense and threatening forest surrounding them. "Wait here," he said, his voice harsh and distant. "I need to get something. I won't be long." Sophie looked at him, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Sam, what's going on? Why are we here?" But Sam had already gotten out of the car, heading into the forest without looking back. Sophie waited, the minutes passing slowly, her anxiety growing with each moment. William began to cry, perhaps sensing the tension in the air, so she rocked him gently, trying to calm both his fears and her own. It's okay, my love," she whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Daddy will be back soon. Everything's going to be fine." But the minutes turned into an hour, and Sam did not return. Sophie got out of the car, pacing anxiously as she tried to soothe William. Then she heard the unmistakable sound of an engine starting. Her heart sank, a terrible coldness gripping her. "Sam," she cried, running towards the sound. "Sam, wait." But it was too late. She emerged from the forest just in time to see Sam getting into another car and disappearing into the distance, the sound of the engine fading until there was only silence. Sophie, who didn't know how to drive, stood there, shocked and incredulous, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Sam, her husband, her love, had abandoned her. He had left her and their son defenseless in the middle of nowhere. A strangled sob escaped her throat, her knees giving way beneath her. She fell to the ground, cradling William against her chest as tears streamed down her face. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice broken by pain and betrayal. "How could you do this to us, Sam?" But there was no answer, only the deafening silence of the forest and the soft cries of her son. Sophie allowed herself to cry for a moment, her heart breaking for the life she had known, for the love she had believed unbreakable. Then William stirred in her arms, his little face wrinkled with discomfort, and in that moment, something changed in Sophie. A fierce determination took hold of her, burning away the fog of despair. She couldn't fall apart, not now. She had her son, who needed her, who depended on her. She had to be strong. She had to find a way out of this mess. With trembling legs, Sophie stood up, holding Will close. She looked around, trying to get her bearings, to find some sign of civilization. There was nothing but trees as far as the eye could see. She had no idea where she was or which way to go, but she knew she couldn't stay there. "We're going to get out of this, William," she said, her voice still trembling but full of determination. "Mommy will take care of you, I promise." She took a step forward, then another. With each step, she could feel something inside her hardening, an unyielding resolve taking shape. She would walk until she couldn't walk anymore. She would fight until she had no strength left. She would do anything, whatever it took, to keep her son safe, because that's what a mother did, and she was William's mother, no matter what the world or even Sam might think. Sophie wandered through the forest for what felt like hours, her body exhausted and her mind clouded by fatigue and despair. William had stopped crying, but his silence only increased her worry. Just as she was beginning to lose hope, she heard a sound in the distance, a bark. The sound was followed by footsteps, and then a voice calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Sophie almost cried with relief. "Here," she shouted, her voice hoarse from thirst and emotion. "We're here." From among the trees appeared a figure, an older woman, her face wrinkled but kind, followed closely by a sturdy-looking dog. The woman stopped when she saw Sophie, her eyes filled with surprise and concern. "My goodness, child," she said, hurrying over, "what happened to you? Are you all right?" Sophie opened her mouth to respond, but instead a sob came out. The woman didn't hesitate, wrapping Sophie in a hug, careful not to squeeze William too tightly. There, she cried, patting Sophie's back. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of you." She led Sophie through the forest, speaking softly the whole way. She introduced herself as Mrs. Charlotte, and the dog as Max. Soon, they arrived at a small cabin, cozy and well-kept. Inside, Mrs. Charlotte insisted that Sophie sit while she prepared some food. Max curled up at Sophie's feet, his presence warm and comforting. "Now," said Mrs. Charlotte, placing a steaming bowl of soup in front of Sophie, "do you want to tell me what happened? How did you end up in the forest with a baby in your arms?" Sophie hesitated, the shame and pain still fresh, but something in Mrs. Charlotte's kind gaze made her speak, the words tumbling out in a rush. She spoke of Sam, of their love and their dreams for the future, of William's birth and Sam's reaction, of the accusations and the growing tension, and finally of the abandonment, of being left alone and defenseless in the forest. Throughout it all, Mrs. Charlotte listened, her face showing understanding and compassion. When Sophie finished, exhausted and empty, Mrs. Charlotte took her hand. "What they did to you is unforgivable," she said, her voice firm but gentle, "but you're not alone, Sophie. I know what it's like to be abandoned, to be left to fend for yourself." She proceeded to tell her own story, of a young and passionate marriage, of promises made and broken, of waking up one day to find her husband gone, taking everything but the cabin in which she now lived. "I thought my life had ended that day," Mrs. Charlotte said, her eyes distant, "but I carried on. I found strength in myself that I didn't know I had, just like you will." Sophie felt tears well up again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of connection. Here, in this hidden cabin in the forest, she had found not just shelter but understanding, perhaps even a glimmer of hope. You can stay here as long as you need, Mrs. Charlotte said, squeezing Sophie's hand. You and William, this can be your home now, if you want. Sophie looked around at the warm and cozy cabin, at Mrs. Charlotte's kind and understanding face. She thought about the uncertain and frightening world outside, a world she now had to navigate alone. But perhaps, she thought, looking at William asleep in her arms, she wasn't so alone after all. Perhaps, in this unexpected friend, she had found not just refuge but a family. Thank you, she whispered, the word heavy with emotion. Mrs. Charlotte simply smiled, a smile that promised not just comfort but also strength. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Life in Mrs. Charlotte's cabin became routine, but it was a routine that Sophie grew to appreciate. She woke up early each morning, often to the sound of William's soft coos. She would feed and change him, finding joy in his little smiles and laughter. Then she would join Mrs. Charlotte for breakfast, often a simple but satisfying meal of eggs and tortillas. While they ate, they planned their day. There was much to do around the cabin, washing clothes, cooking, cleaning, tending to the garden. Sophie threw herself into these tasks, finding a sense of purpose in their completion. At first, her hands, accustomed to a softer life, became covered in blisters and calluses, but over time they toughened, just like her resolve. Mrs. Charlotte was a constant and comforting presence. She taught Sophie the skills needed for her new life, how to make a rich chicken broth, how to mend a torn shirt, how to soothe a crying baby. But more than that, she offered wisdom and companionship. In the long afternoons while William napped, they would sit together and talk. Mrs. Charlotte shared stories of her own life, the challenges she had faced and how she had overcome them. Life is never easy, my child, she would say, her eyes bright with wisdom born from experience, but we are stronger than we think. You are stronger than you think. Sophie absorbed these words, letting them take root in her heart, and as the days passed, she began to believe they might be true. There were moments, of course, when the pain of Sam's betrayal struck her again, leaving her breathless and dazed, moments when she looked at William and wondered how she could raise him alone, how she could be both mother and father. But in those moments, Mrs. Charlotte was there, offering a shoulder to cry on or a hand to hold, and Sophie found herself increasingly able to push those thoughts aside, to focus on the present instead of the past. There was a peace in this life, one she had never known before, in the silence of the forest, in the steady rhythm of daily tasks. She found a sense of belonging. She watched William grow and change, his babbling turning into words, his wobbly steps turning into runs. In him, she saw hope, she saw the future, and as time passed, she began to see that hope and future for herself too. She began to imagine a life beyond the pain and betrayal, a life of purpose and peace. One day, while hanging the laundry to dry under the warm sun, Mrs. Charlotte approached her. For a moment, they simply stood together, admiring the quiet beauty of the forest. You're doing a good job, Sophie, Mrs. Charlotte said, her voice soft but firm. With William, with everything. I hope you know that. They stayed there for a moment, two women bound by circumstance and forged by adversity. They were not mother and daughter, not by blood, but in every way that mattered, they were family. Years passed, and little William grew into a curious and intelligent young boy under the loving guidance of Sophie and the wise tutelage of Mrs. Charlotte. He flourished like a plant under the sun. From the beginning, Sophie was committed to giving William the best education possible. Although they lived far from schools and libraries, she turned the cabin into a classroom and the forest into a laboratory. She taught him to read using the few precious books Mrs. Charlotte had accumulated over the years. Together, they worked their way through classics like Don Quixote and the Iliad, with Sophie patiently explaining difficult words and concepts. But it was Mrs. Charlotte who truly ignited William's passion for learning. With her vast knowledge of nature, she would take him on long walks through the forest, pointing out the various plants and animals. Look, William, she would say, bending down to point at a small green sprout emerging from the ground, this is an oak seedling. Though it's small now, one day it will grow to be a mighty tree. William's eyes would light up with wonder, his young mind already humming with questions. How does it grow so big? What does it eat? How long does it take? Mrs. Charlotte would smile, delighted by his curiosity. Ah, those are good questions. Let's find out together. And so they would, spending hours examining leaves and soil, discussing the mysteries of photosynthesis and nutrients. William soaked up every piece of information like a sponge, always hungry for more. As he grew, his thirst for knowledge only intensified. He spent hours wandering through the forest, observing insects and birds, collecting samples of rocks and plants. Sometimes, Sophie worried about his intensity, about the way he seemed to get lost in his own thoughts. "Are you sure it's normal?" she would ask Mrs. Charlotte, watching William scribble furiously in one of his many notebooks. "Shouldn't he be playing with other children, doing normal kid things?" But Mrs. Charlotte would simply shake her head, a wise smile on her face. "He's special, Sophie. His mind works in a different way. It needs to be fed, not stifled." And so Sophie learned to embrace her son's quirks, to nurture his passions rather than stifle them. She would get him books during her rare trips to town, ask him questions about his latest discoveries, and listen patiently as he rambled about the wonders of the natural world. It wasn't a conventional childhood, but it was one filled with love and wonder. There were moments, of course, when William yearned for something more. He would watch the birds flying over the trees and dream of seeing what lay beyond the forest, beyond the borders of his small world. One day, while helping Mrs. Charlotte pull weeds from the garden, he finally voiced these longings. "Mrs. Charlotte," he said, his voice hesitant, "do you think I'll ever be able to go to a real school, learn things I can't learn here?" Mrs. Charlotte sat back on her heels, looking at William with serious eyes. "Is that what you want, to go somewhere else, to learn new things?" William hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. There's so much I want to know, so much I want to see." Mrs. Charlotte sighed, but it wasn't a sigh of disappointment, but of understanding. "I always knew we couldn't keep you here forever," she said. "You have a destiny bigger than this forest, William." She took his hands, her calloused palms against his. "If that's what you want, then we will help you achieve it, your mother and I, because your happiness is all we've ever wanted." William felt tears prick at his eyes, his throat tightening with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, "thank you." As William entered adolescence, his passion for learning only intensified. He spent hours hunched over biology and medicine books that Sophie had managed to obtain during her trips to the city, his eyes devouring every word. "Mom," he said one day, looking up from a thick tome on anatomy, "I want to be a doctor." Sophie, who was mending a shirt, paused, surprise and emotion battling on her face. "A doctor, William? That's wonderful." William smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that went beyond his years. "I want to help people," he said. "I want to make a difference, just like you've always wanted." Sophie felt her throat tighten. She had spent so many years focusing on survival, on giving William the best life possible, that she had buried her own dreams deep down. But now, listening to her son, she felt those dreams resurface. "I always wanted to be a doctor," she admitted, her voice soft with memory. Before everything. I wanted to help people, cure diseases, relieve pain." William took her hand, his eyes shining with determination. "Then that's what I'll do for you, for me, for all the people we can help." Sophie couldn't hold back the tears now, streaming down her cheeks. She hugged William tightly, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and love. "I know you will," she whispered. From that day on, William pursued his goal with renewed intensity. He studied late into the night, memorizing medical terms and biological processes. He practiced first aid with Mrs. Charlotte, learning how to bandage wounds and splint broken bones. But as the time to leave for university approached, he couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. "What if I'm not ready?" he confided in Mrs. Charlotte one day while they were gathering herbs in the garden. "What if I'm not good enough?" Mrs. Charlotte straightened, looking at William with serious eyes. "William, I've watched you grow from a curious child into a young man with more compassion and determination than I've seen in most adults. If anyone is ready for this, it's you." William swallowed, feeling some of his doubts fade. "But the outside world, it's so different from what I know. What if I don't fit in?" Mrs. Charlotte smiled, that wise smile that William had come to know and love. "You will adapt, as you always have. And remember, no matter what happens, you will always have a home here. You will always have people who love you and believe in you." The day before William left for university, Sophie called him for a serious conversation. There was tension in her posture, a shadow in her eyes that William had never seen before. "William," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you, something about your father." William sat down, his heart racing. In all his years, Sophie had rarely mentioned his father. All he knew was that his father had died when he was a baby. "Mom, what is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sophie took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "Your father, he didn't die as I made you believe. He abandoned us." William felt the air leave his lungs. Abandoned us? But why? Tears started rolling down Sophie's cheeks. "When you were born, you were so different from us, so pale, so blonde. Your father couldn't understand it. He thought I had been unfaithful." William felt a surge of emotion, confusion, anger, pain. "But you weren't," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sophie shook her head. "No, never. But I couldn't convince him. He was so angry, so hurt. He took you and me to this forest and left us." William stood up, beginning to pace, his mind spinning, trying to make sense of this new information. All his life, he had felt his father's absence as a constant void. Now, knowing the truth, "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, turning to his mother. Sophie stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Because you're about to enter the world, and I don't want you to have any secrets, any doubts about who you are or where you come from." William looked at his mother, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. He saw the pain in her eyes, the lines of worry on her forehead, but he also saw the strength, the resilience. "You are my mother," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "You and Mrs. Charlotte are my family. Nothing, not even this, will change that." Sophie sobbed, pulling William into a tight embrace. They clung to each other, finding comfort in their unbreakable bond. The next day, when William left, he did so with a new sense of resolve. He knew who he was. He knew the strength from which he came, and he would carry that strength with him no matter where he went. University was a challenge, but one that William faced with unwavering determination. He immersed himself in his studies, his passion for learning only intensified by the struggles he had faced. There were moments of doubt, moments when he wondered if he truly belonged, but then he would think of his mother, of Mrs. Charlotte, of the unwavering faith they had in him, and he would find the strength to keep going. He graduated at the top of his class, praised by his professors as one of the most promising cardiac surgeons they had ever seen. But for William, his greatest achievement was seeing the pride in his mother's eyes on his graduation day. "You did it," Sophie whispered, hugging him tightly. "I knew you would." William smiled through his own tears. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, "without you and Mrs. Charlotte. You made me who I am." William settled into his new position at the local hospital, his dedication and skill quickly earning the respect of his colleagues. He spent long hours in the operating room, his focus unwavering as he worked to save lives. It was during one of these surgeries that he met Sam. The man had been brought in with a severe heart condition, his life hanging by a thread. William worked feverishly, his hands moving with precision and expertise. The hours were tense, filled with highs and lows, but in the end, William emerged triumphant. Sam would survive. That day, William saved the life of his own father, although it felt strange. When he saw Sam, he didn't let his emotions get the best of him and simply focused on doing his job. Days later, while William was making his rounds, he encountered a recovering Sam. The man smiled upon seeing him, his gratitude evident. "Doctor," he said, his voice still weak but filled with emotion, "you saved my life. I don't know how to thank you." William smiled, touched by the man's sincerity. "I was just doing my job," he said. "I'm glad to see you're recovering well." But Sam wouldn't be satisfied with a simple thank you. He insisted that William come to dinner at his house once he was fully recovered. "Please," he said, "it's the least I can do. My family will want to meet the man who saved me." William hesitated, unaccustomed to such effusiveness, but there was a sincerity in Sam's eyes that he couldn't deny. "All right," he conceded, "once you're back on your feet and I have a night off, I'll accept your invitation." Sam smiled, shaking William's hand with gratitude. In the weeks that followed, William immersed himself even further in his work. There was a satisfaction in what he did, a sense of purpose he had never known, but there was also a weight, a responsibility that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. There were patients he couldn't save, families he had to console. Each loss pained him, each life he couldn't save was a burden on his heart. William met Lucy at the hospital. She was a respected nurse who exuded talent and beauty. Soon after a casual encounter in the hospital cafeteria, William and Lucy started dating. On that day, William could hardly contain his excitement as he drove Lucy down the familiar road to the cabin of his childhood. He had spent months talking about this moment, finally introducing the woman he loved to the two most important people in his life. Lucy, for her part, was nervous. She knew how much Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte meant to William, how much they had shaped the person he was today. She desperately wanted to make a good impression. When they arrived, Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte were already waiting on the porch. William had barely stopped the car before he jumped out, running to wrap his mother in a tight hug. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I missed you." Sophie hugged him tightly, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "I missed you too, my boy." She turned to Lucy, who had approached shyly. "And you must be Lucy," she said, extending her arms. "Welcome, dear." Lucy found herself enveloped in the hug, her nervousness melting away at the warm welcome. Over Sophie's shoulder, she saw Mrs. Charlotte smiling at her, her eyes shining with wisdom and affection. As the day progressed, Lucy found herself feeling more and more at ease. There was an ease in their interactions, a sense of family she had never experienced before. She watched as William joked with Mrs. Charlotte, his laughter echoing through the cabin. She saw the way Sophie's eyes softened every time she looked at her son, pride and love evident in every glance. And as they talked, as they shared stories and dreams, Lucy felt herself being drawn into this circle of love. It was during a quiet moment, while Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte were busy in the kitchen, that William finally expressed the desires he had been holding in his heart. "Mom, Mrs. Charlotte," he began, taking Lucy's hand, "Lucy and we've been talking about our future, about starting a family of our own." Sophie gasped, her eyes already filling with tears. Mrs. Charlotte simply smiled, as if she had been expecting this moment. "But we don't want to do it alone," William continued. "We want you to be part of it, part of our lives, day by day." Lucy nodded, squeezing William's hand. "What William is trying to say," she interjected, "is that we would love for you to consider moving closer to the city, close to us." There was a moment of silence. Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "William, Lucy, nothing would make us happier, but this cabin, this forest, it's our home." William nodded, his expression understanding but determined. "I know, Mom, and I'm not asking you to give that up. But maybe it's time for a new chapter, for all of us." Mrs. Charlotte stepped forward, placing a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "He's right, Sophie," she said softly. "Our home is where our family is, and our family is about to grow." Sophie looked around at the walls of the cabin that had witnessed so many moments, so many memories. Then she looked at William, at the life he had built, at the family he was building, and with a sob, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered, "okay, let's do it." The room erupted in cheers and tears, hugs being exchanged and plans being made. Lucy once again found herself enveloped in Sophie's embrace, but this time she felt less like a stranger and more like a daughter. The house that William had bought was perfect, at least in his opinion. It was spacious, with enough rooms to accommodate their growing family, but more than that, it had potential to become a home. Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte arrived on a sunny spring day, their few belongings packed in boxes. William and Lucy were there to greet them, their faces radiant with excitement. "Welcome home," William said, opening the door wide. Sophie walked in first, her eyes already glistening with tears. She walked from room to room, her hand brushing the walls as if trying to familiarize herself with this new space. Mrs. Charlotte followed, her step a bit slower but her smile just as bright. When she reached the backyard, she stopped, her gaze captured by the wide green space. "This," she declared, "would be perfect for a garden." And so the transformation began. In the days and weeks that followed, the house was filled with noise and activity. Furniture was moved, walls were painted, memories were unpacked and carefully placed. But it was in the backyard where the real magic happened. Under Mrs. Charlotte's expert guidance, the barren land was transformed, flower beds were planted, rows of vegetables were sown, even a small pond was installed, complete with water lilies and goldfish. Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte spent hours there, their hands digging into the soil, their faces turned toward the sun. For them, it was more than just a pastime, it was a connection to their past, a reminder of the home they had left behind. As the garden flourished, so did the family bonds. Dinners became noisy and joyful affairs, with Lucy insisting on learning Mrs. Charlotte's traditional recipes. One day, she promised, "I'll be the one cooking for you all." Evenings were spent playing board games and sharing stories, with Sophie and Mrs. Charlotte recounting tales of their time in the forest, and William and Lucy talking about their hopes for the future. It was during one of these evenings that William finally expressed the desire he had been nurturing. "Mom, Mrs. Charlotte," he began, "Lucy and we are thinking about having a baby." The room was silent for a moment before erupting in a chorus of congratulations and joyful tears. Sophie hugged her son tightly, her voice choked with emotion. "You will be a wonderful father," she whispered. Mrs. Charlotte nodded, her smile gentle and wise. "This child will be lucky," she said, "to have a family like this." A few months passed, and one day, while walking through the hospital corridors, William ran into Sam, now fully recovered. Sam renewed his invitation for dinner at his house. "William," he said, a bit embarrassed, "I accepted." William adjusted his tie for the umpteenth time as he walked towards Sam's front door. Sam opened the door with a welcoming smile, gesturing William inside with a friendly wave. "William, I'm glad you could make it." William smiled, trying to shake off his apprehension. "Thank you for inviting me, Sam. I appreciate the opportunity to get to know your family better." As he entered the dining room, Sam introduced William to his grandmother, Amelia, an older woman with gray hair and piercing eyes that looked at him with a disconcerting intensity. Sam had taken care of his grandmother since the day his parents died in a terrible car accident. "William," Sam said, "I'd like you to meet my grandmother, Amelia." "Grandma, this is Dr. William, the man who saved my life." William extended his hand, but Amelia made no move to take it. Instead, she continued to stare at him, her expression unreadable. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am," William said, trying to hide his discomfort. Dinner began with polite conversation, but William couldn't help but notice Amelia's persistent glances. It was as if she were trying to solve a puzzle, to fit the pieces of a mystery only she knew. It was during dessert that she finally spoke, her voice low but clear in the silence of the room. "You look like him, you know," she said, her eyes never leaving William's face. William blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "James," Amelia continued, "my James. You are the spitting image of him." "William, could you tell us a little about your family?" Amelia asked, her voice soft but inquisitive. William nodded, though he felt a pang of sadness thinking about his mother and Mrs. Charlotte. "Well, my mother's name is Sophie. She raised me alone with the help of Mrs. Charlotte, an incredible woman who took us in when we needed it most. My father, I never knew him. He abandoned us shortly after I was born." Amelia stared at him as if seeing a ghost, her eyes filled with tears as she recognized James's features in the young William. The room fell silent, expectant. "William," she finally said, her voice trembling, "your face reminds me of someone I knew many years ago, a man named James." Sam, who had been listening in silence until then, turned white as a sheet. He looked at William more closely, noticing for the first time the familiar features in the young doctor. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. Amelia sighed deeply, lost in memories that had been buried for decades. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Sam looked between his grandmother and William, clearly as bewildered as the rest of them. Amelia aside, and for a moment, it seemed as if the weight of the years fell upon her. "James was my first love," she said, "the true love of my life." She proceeded to tell her story, her voice gaining strength with each word. She spoke of a young and passionate love between a black woman and a white man, of secret meetings and whispered promises. But she also spoke of duty and obligation, of an arranged marriage with her late husband, Daniel. "I thought I could forget him," she said, her eyes clouded with memory. "I thought I could be happy with Daniel, but then I discovered I was pregnant, and I knew the baby was James's." A collective gasp filled the room. Sam stood up, his face pale with shock. "Grandma,